So a little bit about me. I'm the founder and director of Making Design Circular, which is a online learning platform and membership community for designers, makers, artists, and craftspeople. Essentially, anybody who has ideas and brings those ideas to life with their hands. And the idea of that space is that I want each and every one of you to feel proud of contributing to a thriving planet with every product that you make. And I believe that's fully possible. I think craftspeople are actually already a lot more sustainable than they realise, and very much part of the solution, not part of the problem. So it's all about sort of helping you to move towards a more circular way of doing things. And the other part of my work as a journalist, author, podcaster, and keynote speaker is about telling the world about what you do and helping everyone else to be inspired by kind of craft thinking and the very sustainable circular approaches that you have innately in your practices. I grew up in Cornwall and now live in Cornwall again. And I think being surrounded by the sea and the moors and the kind of natural world is really a part of what's pulled me back to this subject and made me really passionate about sustainability. I've got a helicopter going over, so I'm just going to shut my window. Doesn't look like an air ambulance one, so hopefully it's nothing serious. Yeah, I mean, I was having a kind of, I talk a lot about defiant hope because I think I need that message as much as anybody else. So I was having a bit of an overwhelmed day yesterday, and I went for a walk and came home with a whole handful of blackberries, and just that sense of kind of the abundance of nature. It's just lovely to be able to get out into nature and kind of connect with that on a regular basis. I am also a thoroughly imperfect environmentalist. This bit of this slide used to say that I drink Diet Coke, but I haven't had a Diet Coke for 3 weeks. I'm so proud of myself. But I am not some holier than thou hair shirt environmentalist. I am as flawed as the next person, and I buy water in plastic bottles and fly on planes and kind of do all the stuff that we all try not to do, but sometimes is unavoidable. I did a post on Instagram recently that said I'm an environmentalist and listed all my eco confessions, and it was quite funny because it absolutely blew up because I think we all do these things, right? And a lot of my work is about kind of that shared vulnerability of imperfection and the idea that we can all do our best and we can make progress, and we don't have to wait until we're perfect to make a contribution. You know, we can be doing good things alongside doing bad things. And that is the human condition. This is the compulsory logo slide to convince you of my credentials. These are some organizations I've studied with, worked for, written for. There's lots more, but every one of these presentations seems to have a slide with logos on it. So here's mine. My most recent book, as Hannah said, is Broken, Mending and Repair in a Throwaway World, which Jay Blades was very kind to write the foreword for. He described me as my fairy godmother, and I was like, Jay, about 10 years older than me. But aside from that, it was a very generous forward. And yeah, this is one of the ways in which I champion craftspeople and the good they're doing in the world. This one profiles 28 makers and menders who are using mending and repair in some way, or mending and repair techniques in some way in their work. The book before that was Wasted When Trash Becomes Treasure, which again profiles, I think, 25 makers who are using waste or second life materials as their primary resource in their practices. And then before that, I wrote Urban Potters Weaving, Makers of East London, and there was a tiny little book called Interviews that happened even before that. So sort of diving into different areas of craft and making. My podcast is Circular with Katie Treggiden, soon to be retitled Making Design Circular with Katie Treggiden. Long story. But you can find that wherever you usually listen to your podcasts, and it dives into a lot of the stuff we're going to be talking about today in more depth. So if anything we talk about today kind of captures your interest, I'm fairly sure there'll be a podcast episode on it. So that one is worth looking up. Prior to all of this, I ran a blog called Confessions of a Design Geek and an independent magazine called Fiera. And I share that just because sometimes people go, oh, that's you. So sometimes it's nice just to make the connection with folk who've been around since the very early days of my story. So let's dive into the Making Design Circular framework. So this is it. The middle bit, I love a Venn diagram. So the middle bit, the bit where all of these things converge, is the idea of rewilding your creative practice so that you, your business, and the planet can thrive. And I'll just unpick that a little bit. You've probably come across the term rewilding in the sort of environmental sense. So it's about letting nature take over spaces, often involves reintroducing top predators. It's this idea that actually if we let nature kind of do its thing, biodiversity will come back. So I love that meaning, but there's also another meaning for me of the word rewild. And this is about the fact that an awful lot of craftspeople have been socialized as women, are part of other historically marginalized communities, and or have just grown up with that starving artist myth. And as a result, there's a lot of shoulds in our worlds, right? We're told that we should look a certain way, we should show up on social media a certain way, we should be running our businesses a certain way, you know, we shouldn't be charging too much money, making too much noise, kind of all these constant shoulds. And I think part of what I want to do is help makers shake off all of those shoulds and just rewild their creative practice, kind of go back to the very thing that got them into this in the first place, that kind of curiosity and creativity and experimentation that was with you when you started your practice. And the second part of this sentence, so that you, your business, and the planet can thrive, I think often these three things feel in tension with each other. So there's this idea that we have to choose which one of those to pour into, whether it's our own personal well-being, whether it's kind of our creative practice, whether it's the financial health of the business that creative practice underpins, and or whether it's kind of the environmental actions, and they feel like they're in tension with each other. If we kind of work our way through this framework and put all this stuff into action, the outcome that I hope to bring about for you all is that when you pour into yourself, you're pouring into your creative practice. When you pour into your creative practice, you're pouring into your business. And when you pour into your business, you're pouring into the environment. So all of those things line up. They stop being in tension. It starts to be the fact that looking after yourself is looking after your business, is looking after the planet. And we'll come on to that in a little bit more detail. And then we have this Venn diagram, which has these three sections: release, plant, and grow. And then each of those three sections has three sections within it. All of my stuff has sort of plant-based metaphors underpinning it, and I'm yet to find the right naming structure. So I sort of talk about these as pillars or pods or branches. I'll work it out eventually, but bear with me while I do. So before we dive into that in depth, these are the heroes and villains of my work. So on the left, you've got the villains, and on the right, you've got the heroes. And so what I hope to do is to move folks from perfectionism into imperfect progress, move out of this sense of overwhelm towards a sort of step-by-step journey that just focuses on one thing at a time, moves out of this constant obsession with productivity and this idea that we must always be making and producing and posting on social media, towards this idea of rest, and actually rest not as a reward for hard work, but rest as a precursor. So I must be rested in order to do my best work, or in order just to exist as a human, right? We have a birthright to rest. We don't need to earn it. Away from this sense of trying to save the planet single-handedly, towards picking a tiny, tiny niche, a tiny area in which you can make a disproportionately positive impact. Away from this idea of trying to get environmentalism quote unquote right. There's no such thing. It's all about making values aligned decisions, and we'll come back to that in a lot more depth. Away from despair and towards stubborn optimism, which is a phrase from a book called The Future We Choose, by Tom Rivett-Carnett and Christina Figueres, and that's where a lot of my thinking on defiant hope comes from. Away from guilt and duty and towards curiosity and experimentation, because guilt and duty are not the soil in which creativity thrives. So they are not helpful to us in this kind of mission towards a better world. And away from individualism, which a lot of our society is dominated by now, and towards community and collaboration. So that's sort of what we're aiming for. And then this is the framework that makes that stuff happen. So first we have absolve, and this is the idea that the climate crisis is not your fault. The environmentalism crisis is not your fault. None of what's happening now has been caused by you, and therefore you have no need to feel guilty for it. I'm not going to point any fingers at whose fault it might be, but it's definitely not yours. And it breaks my heart when tiny makers who are batch producing and hand making worry about putting more quote unquote stuff into the world. The stuff you're making is not the problem. The stuff these guys are making is the problem. You are very much part of the solution. However, it's very much a but and situation. It is our responsibility. We are possibly the last generation who have the opportunity to do something about this. And it's absolutely your choice whether you choose to step up to that responsibility or not. There's no obligation, there's no guilt, there's no duty, but it can be an incredibly exciting opportunity. And I hope that throughout the course of this talk, I will convince you that there is more excitement in here than there is guilt. So then the next segment, petal, I don't know, I'm going to come up with some good names for these, is liberate. And so this is the idea of liberating yourself from that guilt and that duty, but also from perfectionism. So I think we are all on board with the fact that the imperfections of natural materials, the imperfections of the human hand are beautiful, right? As craftspeople, imperfection is our bag, right? And yet we still try to get sustainability perfect. And we still think, well, I can't start talking about that yet because I haven't done this, that, and the other. And these are all the ways that sneaky perfectionism can come in and hold us back from making an impact. So I try to convince all of my folks that we are to be imperfectionists and to value progress over perfection. So kind of letting go of these ideas that it has to look a certain way in order to be valid, or that we're hypocritical if we're only doing a bit of it and not doing all of it. Nobody's perfect. So if you're trying to do the right thing, you are inherently a hypocrite. And I think the sooner we all embrace that, the better. You can't try to do good without being hypocritical, because perfection doesn't exist. So it's about aiming for imperfect progress. And then the next section within release is this idea of align. So as I said at the beginning, I think so many of us are trying to get environmentalism right. There's no such thing, or rather there are 1,000 million different ways of getting it right. So instead of worrying about whether it's right or wrong, whether you're going to get called out on the internet, what somebody else thinks, is about making decisions that align with your values. And if you're making decisions that align with your values, you can have nuanced, intelligent conversations with people. So when someone says, hey, why are you using plastic in your work? Like, I don't think that's right. You can sort of say, well, actually, I've looked into the alternatives and this is reclaimed plastic. And in, in terms of my values, it's more important that I'm taking, for example, ocean plastic out of the sea and using it rather than letting it stay there. So you can have these kind of conversations that have a bit more nuance and are rooted in your personal values rather than being quote unquote right. Veganism is the one that often comes up. There's quite rightly, certain people believe that we shouldn't use any animal products in design, particularly if we're not having them in our diet. Other people believe that it's more important to support regenerative farming and use leather, for example, that's come out of farming methods that are putting good things back into the soil. I believe both of those two arguments are completely valid, and what matters is whether you're making decisions that align with your personal values. And so one of the things we spend quite a lot of time on in both my course, The Seed, and in the membership, is working out what your values are rather than the values you might have inherited from family, from school, from society. It's about working out actually what your values are and then making decisions that align with those. So that is the release section. So this is all the stuff that's not serving us that we're letting go of. And now we start to plant the seeds of your rewilded creative practice. And the first point is believe, and this is about defiant hope. And I love this quote from Arundhati Roy. Another world is not only possible, she's on her way. On a quiet day, I can hear her breathing. And I think there is an awful lot of bad news in the news. There are an awful lot of brilliant, brave people like Greta Thunberg and George Monbiot speaking truth to power, and that's really important. But fear doesn't drive change, and there's also a lot of amazingly positive stuff happening that doesn't make it into the news, that we don't hear about, the ways in which we can already hear her breathing, right? And so one of the things I really encourage people to do is curate their news sources to make sure that they're hearing about this positive news that's happening so they can stay hopeful. And I have a whole free mini course called Cultivating Hope in the Face of the Environmental Crisis, which has this sort of 3-stage process which helps you to move from despair to hope. But as I said, it's not about naive optimism. It's about waking up every day and making an active choice to be hopeful and to act accordingly, because if we don't have hope, we won't act. And I think it's one of those sort of foregone conclusions that if we don't act, then it's going to end up bad, right? So we have to choose hope. And then define. This is about this idea that we can't save the world single-handedly. And that sounds silly. Like, if you think about it, none of us is going to save the planet on our own. But also, I do think I certainly feel this sense of, oh my God, you know, what am I doing about climate change and ocean acidification and biodiversity? And should I be using plastic in my packaging? And there becomes this real sense of overwhelm that I have to fix all of those problems. And actually what happens when you do that is you get burnt out and you get spread far too thin. When you pick one tiny area to focus and choose it carefully so that it plays to your strengths, it's fun, it aligns with your values, and it makes a contribution that you're passionate about and excited about, you can have a disproportionately positive impact. So you can make more difference than the average human if you really focus in one area and choose that area quite carefully. And again, I have a course called The Seed in which we do this. We pick that one area, and there are loads of examples of people making incredible difference. One I like to talk about is a company called Green and Blue, who make habitats for solitary bees. That's all they do. And they use waste china clay from the china clay industry in Cornwall to do that. And it's now mandatory that any new build in Brighton and Hove has to include their bee bricks, so that these habitats are being put into the built environment. And that's sort of starting to spread to other councils as well. So they are having a huge impact. And they do things like have Solitary Bee Week, which they invented, where you have to wear your stripes to show solidarity with the bees, and also earn your stripes and talk about the things you're doing to support solitary bees. And so they've had a huge impact by picking a ridiculously tiny focus. You know, I mean, it's 200 species of bee, so it's not insignificant, but it's a tiny area of focus. Seth Godin says that specific is a kind of bravery. And if anybody hasn't read a book called This Is Marketing, I would highly recommend it. It's ostensibly about marketing, but the way Seth Godin describes marketing or defines marketing is that you can use your business to bring about positive change. And he says that specific is a kind of bravery, and he's talking about niching down in business. And he's right. It's kind of this counterintuitive thing that the fewer things you offer to fewer types of people, the bigger impact you're likely to have, particularly as a tiny business. If you're Amazon, less so. But for any of us, kind of being really focused, you're more likely to have commercial success, is what he's talking about. And the courage comes in that kind of counterintuitive move that's required to get there. I think this takes on extra resonance when we talk about environmentalism, because if I decide just to focus on solitary bees, for example, who's taking care of the ocean? Who's taking care of the climate? Who's taking care of plastics, right? But I think when you do this stuff in community, when you're surrounded by other people who've each picked their tiny area of focus, it requires slightly less courage. Still requires courage, but you can have that kind of sense of, okay, I've got this bit, that person's got that bit, that person's got that bit, no doubt other people have the rest, and we're each making a disproportionately positive impact. So that's what I mean when I talk about define. And then we have play. And I think, again, as creative people, we all understand the power of play, right? We know that to be playful and curious and experimental results in better ideas. But all of a sudden, along comes this really serious thing called the climate crisis, and everybody puts their toys away and takes on this very serious approach. And of course, the climate crisis and the broader environmental crisis are incredibly serious problems, but I don't think we're necessarily going to solve them with only serious approaches. I think the playful approach that creative people know can bring about innovative results, right? Breakthroughs, different solutions is part of the solution that we need to get to the kind of wider solutions we need. So I think it's really important that we hold on to our sense of play, for strategic reasons, but also for our own personal well-being. Brian Sutton Smith says the opposite of play is not work, it's depression. And I'm hearing so much and feeling so much burnout in our industry at the moment, and so many people who've stopped making and gone and got what I heard someone the other day describe as a muggle job, because they're just so burnt out, and that breaks my heart, because makers are part of the solution. We need to find ways to keep you all making, and I think one of those ways is to keep that sense of playfulness in the work, and in not only the making but also the approach to environmentalism. So I'm going to stop there, because the next bit is the bit we're going into a bit more depth. So does anybody have any questions before we dive into the bottom petal, circle, whatever we're calling it? Feel free to pop them in the chat, or if you'd like to unmute, feel free to do that as well. And we've got more opportunities for questions, so if you don't have questions, that's also fine. Don't feel obliged. H, sorry, H, I don't know your full name. H says, I guess it would be nice to hear experiences of figuring out niche. Hannah, hi Hannah. Yeah, I think it is a, hi, I think it is a kind of, it's part experimentation and trying things and seeing what works. I think it's also, there's a Venn diagram which is described as various things and lives on the internet a lot, which is about the things you're good at, the things you love, the things the world needs, and the things you can make money from. And if you can kind of fill that Venn diagram in and find what's in the middle, in the overlap, that's often a good niche for you, because you're playing to your strengths. So that disproportionate impact, it's something that's going to make a contribution. It's something you can earn a living from, but the fact you love it and you enjoy it is important. There's evidence to show that extrinsic motivation, so the things you feel you should do, are less effective in the long term than intrinsic motivation. So the things you do because you love them, you're more likely to carry on doing. And also working out what your values are, so making sure that the work you're doing is aligned with your values, I think is really important as well, because again, when you're out of alignment, that takes extra energy. You're kind of having to show up in a way that isn't quite you, and so that can be quite draining. Whereas when everything is in alignment, and when you've got that idea of your well-being, your business's well-being, and the planet's well-being all in a line, things just flow with much less friction. I have a whole press too many buttons. I have a whole course called The Seed, which is all about finding that niche and that unique contribution. So that might be worth looking at. Yeah, and I think the thing, Hannah's just said, I'll definitely work on writing down my values. I think the thing with the values, I've done hundreds of values exercises, and what your first draft, you often end up with the values you've been told you ought to have. So for a long time, I thought my values were things like hard work and courage and integrity. And I believe those things are important, but they always felt like a stick to beat myself with. And having been through the exercise that I've put in The Seed, my values are now things like connection and curiosity and evolution, and they just feel more expansive. You know, they feel like a, oh. So kind of when you're writing down values, just do that feelings check with them. Do they feel like a stick to beat yourself with, or do they feel like a space you can grow and expand into? And I think the latter are much more effective. And that's not to say those other things aren't important to you and they aren't kind of hygiene factors, but I think your kind of key values should be things that feel like a happy sigh. Cool. All right, I am gonna crack on because I'm slightly conscious of time, but please feel free to continue putting questions in the chat. And as I say, I've got a couple more options where we can come back to them. Lost my screen, my slide. Present. Can everybody see the slide that says that, or any questions? Amazing. I exited out of it accidentally. Cool. So now we're going to get into this bottom section, this grow section. So we've released the stuff that's not serving us. We've planted the seeds, and now we're going to create the conditions for those seeds to grow. Now, all of this stuff underpins all of my work, but the stuff that's in Grow is really what sits in. All of this stuff sits inside of the membership. A lot of it sits outside of the membership as well, but this stuff is really what sits inside the membership. So I want to tell you a little bit about the membership, if that's okay, just to kind of understand where some of this stuff sits. So Making Design Circular is an online membership community. We have members from all over the world. We touch base twice a week with various things. So we have the path to sustainability, which is what I'm going to talk you through in a minute. This is this idea of taking the journey step by step. We have weekly co-working sessions, which are an amazing way. I hear over and over again, I just don't have time for this. I just can't make the time for it. And these are an amazing way just to carve out an hour a week. And it's amazing how much progress you can make in an hour a week. And we do, we turn our mics off. It's all on Zoom. We leave our cameras on. And it's, if you are neurodivergent, this is called body doubling, and it's incredibly effective. If you're neurotypical, it's also pretty effective. Just that sense of there being other people in the room and you've committed to doing something in that time means you get it done. It's amazing. I'm going to come back to community because I want to talk about that last. We have a co-curated library of reading, watching, and listening recommendations. And I'm going to talk in a minute about Learn, and a lot of where that Learn kind of pillar is covered is in the library. Also self-paced courses. So there are currently 3 self-paced courses that live inside the membership. One of them is the Seed, which I've spoken about a couple of times, which is how we define our niche. One is Waste, a Masterclass, which is a course that came out of my Wasted book that's all about how to work with waste as a raw material or second life materials. We have monthly group coaching with Jo Casey, because Jo Casey is an incredible neurodivergent marketing expert and coach. And I think a lot of the stuff that comes up is tied into our sense of identity, right? These are not just business decisions we're making. When you run a single human business, your kind of personal well-being is so tightly wound in with your creative practice, and things like kind of visibility and kind of making a statement and fear of getting called out on the internet. These things are often deeply personally woven. So that coaching is really helpful to kind of untangle some of those challenges. We have a monthly guest speaker, and those are either people from outside of crafts who come to talk to us about things like how to secure funding for environmental projects, or how to move through the B Corp process. And we also have craft workshops. So on Thursday, we have a waste textiles quilt making workshop, which I'm very excited about. We have a little green book, which is a sort of co-curated list of trusted eco suppliers. So if you want to find a website host or work with a photographer and you want to make sure those people are green and aligned with your values, there's that list. And then lastly, there's a sense of community. And that word just kind of sits there like, yeah, obviously there's a community. But I think it's, I guess the best example I can give is we were on a call last week, and one of my members has a product that's been her best-selling product for 20 years, and it's got plastic in it, and she can't work out how to make it without plastic. And the reason she's joined the membership is to work out how to make it without plastic. And I just said to her, I think that's really brave. Like, I think it's really brave to prod at your best-selling product, you know, the product that underpins your whole business. And she started to cry, and I felt quite guilty for making her cry, but we have a lot of tears and a lot of laughter in our call. And she said, and other people kind of agreed, that what she's found in Making Design Circular is a safe space, somewhere that she can be vulnerable, somewhere that she can turn up with half-formed ideas, somewhere that she can kind of share the fears that she has about kind of becoming more sustainable. And that was just a real proud moment for me, because I've always wanted to create this safe space where people can show up as their whole selves. And, you know, we talked at the beginning about this idea of craftspeople often having been socialized as women or being part of historically marginalized communities. And I think being able to show up as your whole self in this environmentalism space, which is full of so much eco-shaming and guilt and fear, and kind of show up whole in that and have conversations with people who are very much in the same position and will meet you with compassion and without judgment, I think is one of the most powerful things. You know, all of this stuff is important, but I think that sense of community and camaraderie as we walk through what is a difficult time in the history of mankind, in terms of the environmental crisis, but also right now, kind of post-COVID, post-Brexit, cost of living crisis. Like, this is a tough time, and to have that sense of camaraderie as we walk through, I always think of that Ram Dass quote of, we're just all walking each other home, and I think it very much feels like that. So I just wanted to spend a moment on community, because I think that word doesn't quite do it justice. So the kind of time and financial investment to join is 1 to 2 hours a week. So we have a standing session on a Thursday lunchtime, which is where we either have a guest speaker or Joe Casey's coaching session, or a Path to Sustainability check-in call, or a connect call. And then we have that optional co-working session on a Tuesday. The cost is £97 plus VAT per month if you pay VAT, and 10% of that is donated to environmental causes and bursary places. So for every 10 full paying members, we have 1 fully funded bursary place. And just because I thought it would be useful to hear from people other than me, Diana says, the best part has been finding similarities between other people's journeys and my own. I feel like I finally found my people. And that second sentence I hear a lot from my members, that sense of, I've finally found this space where I kind of can really belong. It's so nice to be in a group that's at the same stage and feeling such similar struggles, with the opportunity to chat them through and support each other. Making Design Circular membership has given me the confidence and knowledge to evolve my making and business practice to become more aligned with my values. I've been able to do this at my own pace without feeling overwhelmed. And I should mention that Steph has a new baby, but also with a good level of accountability. I've enjoyed being part of a community of other makers and really look forward to our regular meetups. Katie is generous, energetic and knowledgeable, and has created something really special. And then Sarah blew up her entire business and created something. Sarah used to make furniture that had plastic glued to it, so it was very difficult to kind of separate and recycle. And she now makes home accessories from waste coffee. So she's completely changed her business, having worked with me. She said, I often felt a disconnect between my work as a furniture designer maker and my personal values, so I decided to bring them closer together. Being part of Making Design Circle has given me the knowledge and to get started, in a community to share my ideas with. I now have a job that I love and care about, and I'm excited about my future as a maker again. And she talks about the fact that when she stands on craft fair stands now, she feels really proud of what she's doing. And I think that comes across in the way she's talking to customers and selling, because she's got that kind of real sense of alignment that she didn't used to have. So, final slide before we get back to the methodology. I have a special offer for you. There is a 10% off code, which is MDC10 make SW, and a complimentary mentoring and coaching session with me if you join within the next week. And I will just stop sharing for a second and pop the link and that code into the chat, and just allow another moment for questions. So has anybody got any questions on that? Pop them in the chat, or feel free to unmute. I'm just going to pop that link in there, and then I'm also just going to pop that discount code. I love the way Zoom just sort of completely disappears on you, doesn't it? There it is. Cool. Anita says, I think these values could also feed into my artist statement. Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that I sometimes encourage people to do on their websites is write my work is for you if blah, 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 and my work is not for you if blah, 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 blah. And that can be quite a powerful way of kind of communicating your values and connecting with people who share those values. And I think working with people who share your values is just so much more fun and interesting than working with people who don't, right? So that can be quite a nice way to start to articulate some of those things. And absolutely, they should feed into your artist statement as well. Has anybody else got any other questions before we dive into that bottom section of the framework? Amanda says, thanks for sharing, Katie. Does this only apply to makers in the UK and based in Japan or Hong Kong? No, it doesn't. It's I'm assuming you're talking about the membership. It's absolutely international. We have members in Japan. We have members in Scandinavia. We have strangely high proportion of members in Scotland. I'm not quite sure why. Lots across the UK. We have one in France, one in Italy. I think the time zone is the only thing to be conscious of. So the calls happen at 1 p.m. UK time, whether that's British Summer Time or GMT. As we grow, I will eventually add a second set of calls in the evening here to make it a little bit easier. But I think Japan, my member who's in Japan, I think it's breakfast time for her, if I'm right in thinking. So I think it's doable from Japan. But let me know, Amanda, and if you've got any other questions, just give me a shout. Cool. Right, I'm going to try and share my screen again, but I know that the press this one and see if that works. Always seem to end up on the wrong. There we go. And then I'm going to make that full screen again. Cool. Can everybody see that? Give me a thumbs up. Thanks, Hannah. Awesome. So, oh yes, and the other thing I should say is tomorrow we have a waste textiles quilt making workshop with Alice Burnhope, which I am so excited about. So if you want in on that, join super speedily and you can come and make waste textiles quilts, which I'm very excited about. Probably not an entire quilt in 2 hours. So yeah, the reason I wanted to dive into that a little bit is because a lot of this grow stuff sort of sits within the membership. But the first pillar section, need better metaphors, is about learn. And this is about the fact, as we talked about the fact already, that we're not trying to get this right, we're trying to make values aligned decisions. But it's important that those are informed values aligned decisions, right? So that we have this sense of those are decisions that are based in good knowledge. And it's absolutely incredible that sustainability seems to be blowing up slightly in the world and everybody's talking about it, but this like flip side of that is that there's a lot of misinformation out there, there's a lot of greenwashing out there. So a lot of that is about navigating that greenwashing, learning how to discern what is good information, and I think it's also about having access to curated information. So that's one of the things that the library and the membership offers, is kind of information that we know is good information. And again, those guest speakers helping and those self-paced courses helping to kind of keep you informed. This environmentalism, I believe, is going to be a lifelong journey for all of us, and it's evolving, right? It's complex and it's changing. And so I think we have to be committed to this idea of lifelong learning. And so just making sure those values aligned decisions are also well-informed decisions. And that's about this idea of learning, essentially. So then the next segment is walk. And that's short for walk, don't run, because as Lao Tzu possibly said, the journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And so what I've done is I've created a 5-step path to sustainability. And this comes from interviews with hundreds of designer makers who are at some point on this sustainability journey. Because I think what happens is there's all the stuff, right? We're supposed to be doing all this different stuff. We're hearing constantly about new things we could be doing, should be doing, and it gets very overwhelming. So what the 5-stage path to sustainability has done is put all that stuff in an order. It's not the only order, you know, just like kind of climbing a mountain, there's 100 different ways up, but it helps to have a map. And so I encourage people to take this information, look at it, see if it aligns with their values and make their own decisions about what they do. But it just helps to put that overwhelming sense of all the things you need to do in an order so that you can take it step by step. And I think it's really helpful because then when you're talking to people and they say, oh, how come you're not doing X? You can say, oh, no, that's in year 2 of my plan. So at the moment I'm working on this and I understand that needs to be worked on, but it's not right now, rather than that sense of, oh God, I didn't even know about that. You know, it just gives you confidence when you're having those conversations with customers, with suppliers, with, you know, all of those sorts of people. There's that sense of B Corp is one that comes up a lot, and B Corp is a big undertaking for a small company. So I think it helps to say, oh no, I'm just at this stage at the moment and, you know, that's in my plan. So these little symbols are acorn, seedling, sapling, tree and forest. And these are the 5 stages of the 5-stage path to sustainability. And then within each of them, there are 8 steps that you take to get to the next one. So when you join the membership, you self-identify as one of these, and then once a month we have a gentle accountability call to help people move along this journey. So I wanted to dive into this in a little bit of depth because I think it's really helpful, and it can just give you a few things you can tick off today. So acorns are full of good intentions but haven't done a lot yet. They might be new businesses who are just setting up, or they might be legacy businesses who've been around for a while, kind of before this stuff was front of mind, and they don't have any formal environmental policies or accreditations in place yet. Anything that they're doing is very informal. They care deeply about this stuff, but are not sure where to start, and perhaps are feeling guilty for not doing enough, feeling behind, or feeling overwhelmed. They're often already firefighting, so there's not enough time, money, or headspace. A lot of my members are acorns. A lot of my members have a day job, caring responsibilities, kind of other stuff that's going on outside of their creative practices. And so that sense of firefighting is very real. And then we have the seedlings. The seedlings are just getting started. They might have signed up for something like 1% for the planet. They might have done their carbon literacy training. They might be using a carbon neutral delivery service. Shopify offers one, as does DHL, and they might have declared a climate emergency. They are probably already consciously sourcing materials and or packaging, so thinking about where those materials come from, thinking about using plastic-free packaging, for example, maybe FSC certified wood, maybe locally dug clay. They might have written some sort of internal manifesto to sort of guide them, something they've got pinned up. I've got mine pinned up just here, a sort of sense of where they're headed, and they're probably tracking their waste and tracking their carbon emissions, but not necessarily doing anything about them yet. So there's that sense of awareness. They are probably feeling a mixture of daunted and excited. So they've got the knowledge, they kind of understand what needs to be done for this path to sustainability, but they now need to actually implement it, hence the daunted. And they've got lots of ideas, but sometimes find it hard to implement them as a small business or creative practice. Then we have our saplings. Saplings are making good progress, but there's still a long road ahead. They've probably signed up for things like living wage, so they're paying their suppliers their teams kind of either formally or informally a living wage. Importantly, also paying themselves a living wage, which is often a bigger challenge. And they might be sourcing materials with material-specific accreditations, so looking at things like Goodweave, GOTS, which is for textiles, and FSC, which is Forest Stewardship Council. And they are tracking and reducing or offsetting carbon. They have an ethical and transparent supply chain, and they're thinking about things like designing for repair, designing for disassembly, so what happens at the end of life of their product. They're often flipping between pride at the steps taken so far and guilt around the ones not yet taken. This is the middle point in the journey, and it's a tough point in the journey. There's often starting to be frustration at systemic issues small businesses have no control over. One of the really kind of frustrating ones is minimum orders for more environmental options. So things like, I have paper tape instead of plastic tape. I think the minimum order was something like 20 rolls. So I have 20 rolls of this brown paper tape kicking around my office. But it's that sense of like, could you big guys not sort stuff out to help it a bit easier, make it a bit easier for us? They might have a lack of time or budget for bigger certifications. And this is often the point in the sustainability journey where burnout sets in. So it's super important that these guys are taking care of themselves. Then we move into tree, and I don't have any trees in the membership. This is kind of very aspirational at this point in the journey. Trees are close to achieving all their eco goals and now seeking external validation. They are B Corp pending and have some EPDs published. So EPDs are environmental product declarations, which are a life cycle analysis on every product that you make. They're carbon neutral, zero waste, offer some form of repair or take back scheme, and have a formal structure in place for measuring progress. Trees are at the stage where their business and creative practice feels very aligned with their personal values, but the B Corp or EPD process might have highlighted some gaps. So there's a little bit of a sense of kind of 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And so they'll have clarity on some of the other things they now need to be doing. One of their biggest challenges at this point is how to communicate with credibility. So how to kind of, and that's hence looking for some of this external validation. So it's not just about marking your own homework. And they'll also be looking for that next level of investment. So that might be things like electric vehicles to do their deliveries with. Now, forests, there's only one of these. that I know of in our industry. So this really is the North Star. And forests are always looking for ways to improve and stay up to date with the latest developments, finding ways to give back, to take on community leadership roles, and to start tackling those systemic issues. Senior leadership might have NED roles, the company might have set up a foundation, or they might be doing some angel investment into environmentally friendly startups. So my little Zoom thing is right in the way. There we go. So I would love you to know, just from that brief overview, which level you think you're at. Pop into the chat whether you think you're an acorn, seedling, sapling, tree, or forest. And obviously, because you haven't been following this path, you may well find you're a bit of one and a bit of other. Often what we do is once someone works out where they are, they have to kind of scoop up some of the previous actions before moving forward. But it would be lovely just to get a sense of where you think you might be. So Jane says she thinks she's a seedling. Jana, seedling, and Anita, definitely an acorn. I always say to acorns that nobody judges an acorn for not being an oak tree. So I'm always very happy to see acorns full of potential. Anybody else want to share where they think they might be? Amanda says definitely an acorn. I think there's also a business size thing here. I think to be a tree or a forest, often you need to be a bigger business than a lot of us are. Joe says acorn. Amazing. Cool. So what I'm going to do now is just share a couple of actions that you can take to get to the next level. And I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to rattle through these. Daisy says I'm a few simultaneously. Yeah, that happens quite a lot, Daisy. Obviously, because you haven't been following this path so far, you will have done things in the order that they happen to have been done. So there's a little bit of consolidation that sometimes happens at the beginning. Right, so I'm going to rattle through this relatively quickly because I'm conscious of time. Acorns need clarity for the path ahead, information and resources, and help making time for this work, as well as a community of fellow travellers. A couple of things that acorns could do to move to seedling level, if that's something you want to do. One is to carry out a waste audit. And this is just about tracking what you throw away and recycle from your studio or workshop, not judging it, not kind of making any criticism there, but just looking at it and track it in whatever way appeals to you. So you might be someone who loves a spreadsheet, or you might prefer to lay everything out and photograph it. You might want to look at what colours are coming up, what materials are coming up, and just kind of increasing that awareness. Signing up for 1% for the planet is something that is relatively easy to do, and that involves donating 1% of your turnover to an environmental charity, and that can be made up with a quarter marketing and a quarter volunteering, so it only actually has to be 0.5% in cash. And look into Shopify's carbon neutral deliveries. If you're a seedling, you're probably looking for accountability and community support, somewhere to share challenges and wins, and trusted information and resources that are free from greenwashing. If you want to move from seedling to sapling, some of the things you might want to look into are drafting your own environmental manifesto, so a sort of motivating call to action that you can have up on your pin board. Sign up to living wage and make sure you're paying yourself a living wage, as well as any team members, whether they are informal or formal team members, and looking into material specific certifications so you can start to have a sense of where your materials are coming from. Unfortunately, there don't seem to be any good certifications for waste material. So if you're already working with waste, that is a little bit trickier. If you are a sapling, you are probably looking for a community with whom to share your progress so far. You're going to want to have some boundaries and self-care in place to prevent burnout, and inspiration from trees and forests that you can do it, and support in developing some systems and processes. The most important thing, if you're looking to move from sapling to tree, is to recognize and celebrate where you've what you've done so far, looking back and kind of really giving yourself credit for where you are. Taking the initial B Corp assessment, which is free, the BIA. It's on their website, it doesn't cost anything to do, and it will just give you a sense of how close you are to being ready for B Corp and starting to look into those environmental product declarations. If you're a tree, you're probably looking for support with the B Corp and EPD process, inspiration around regenerative projects, peer-to-peer support, as well as one-to-one coaching and mentoring, and opportunities to connect with other trees. And if you're wanting to move from tree to forest, it's time to start thinking about really investing in PR and marketing to tell your story, completing the B Corp certification process, and working towards publishing EPDs on all your products. There's only one company in our industry that's done this, so this is absolute kind of North Star stuff. And if you're a forest, you are probably looking for one-to-one support and consultancy and networks that enable interconnected investment into the community and smaller businesses. And I love thinking about that mycelium network that exists underneath the forest floor that connects all the trees together. So the final thing I want to get to, Jane says, what is signing up to the living wage for oneself? Where do I find it? If you Google living wage online, Jane, you'll find all the information about signing up for living wage. They only ask you to pay your team. And in fact, they only ask you to pay PAY employees living wage. I personally have extended that to anybody who does any work for me. So any freelancers, if I'm using an agency, any freelancers they use, I make sure they all get paid living wage, and I also make sure I'm paying myself living wage. So that's just a personal thing I've done that's kind of expands the remit of what living wage technically asks you to do. But I think it's really important. Hannah says, I'd be interested in how intersectionality relates to becoming greener in business. Hannah, I'm going to come back to you because I think I need you to explain that question in a bit more depth. So let me just rattle through this bit and then we'll come back to that and we'll do that one unmute. So nurture. This is the most important part of the whole framework, because if you're not looking after yourself, you can't do any of this good in the world. And I love this quote, which is to take care of the environment, take care of the environmentalist, right? You can't do good if you're not well. And it's not entirely true. I think for anybody who's suffering with chronic illness and never quite feels well, of course you can do good. But I think in that case, it's even more important you look after yourself. You need to pour into yourself and pour into your creative practice so you can pour into the environment. And I wanted to, again, dive into this in a little bit more depth than I normally do. And apologies that I'm running slightly over as a result. But I think this is really important, particularly at the moment, because I'm hearing so much from makers about how tough everything is feeling at the moment. And I think when things feel really tough, our instinct is just to work harder, right? We kind of go into this panicky, like, I've got to do all the things mode. And again, that feels like the right thing to do, but counterintuitively, what you really need to do is look after yourself even more. And so the first thing you need to do is look after your basic needs. And this sounds really ridiculous, but how many times are you thirsty, but you don't go and get a drink because you're too busy? Well, you need a wee. You don't have a wee because you're too busy. Or you're hungry and you don't eat, or you're tired and you don't sleep. Like, it sounds like such basic stuff, but I think so many of us neglect our very basic needs: sleep, water, food. So making sure that you're really looking after those first, and I mean first. Like, if you're in the middle of a conversation with someone and you need to go to the loo, excuse yourself and go to the loo. And I have this conversation with my husband sometimes, and he's like, right, we'll come in from a day out. And he's like, right, we need to do X, Y, and Z. And I'm just like, no, I need to take care of my basic needs. I'm hungry, I'm thirsty, and I need to pee. I'm going to deal with those things, and then we will do X, Y, and Z. Paying yourself properly. We've talked about living wage. If you're struggling with this, which I know a lot of people do, there's an amazing book called Profit First, which talks about every time some income comes in, you put a little bit in a profit pot, a little bit in a pay yourself pot, a little bit in your tax pot, and a little bit in your business expenses pot. It's very simple. It's not always easy, but it's really worth looking into if you're struggling to pay yourself properly, because I think, again, you need to be taken care of so that you can take care of everything else. I mentioned this idea of rest is not a reward. Rest is what happens first. We need to be well rested in order to do all of the other stuff. And there is an incredible article on the TED website called The 7 Types of Rest. And this is about the fact that rest isn't just sleeping and binging Netflix. We need creative rest, we need sensory rest, we need social rest. And I think spending time in nature, which I come on to, is a really important type of rest. I think many of us have turned our passion, our favorite hobby, into a business, and therefore we don't have any passions or hobbies outside of our business anymore. And I think it's really, really important that we do. And if that can be something that gets you outside and moves your body, even better. So Hannah and I were talking before I joined the call about the fact that I am very lucky to live near a beach where yoga is taught twice a week. And so beach yoga is one of the ways in the summer that I look after myself. So having some interests outside of your creative practice. Connection is incredibly important, kind of having people that you can fully be yourself with. and kind of have those deeper conversations with. And I think particularly having people in your world who are at a similar stage of their creative practice or their environmental journey, so you can share some of those kind of struggles and celebrate some of the wins. There is an immense amount of evidence and research around the positive impact that spending time in nature has on your well-being and mental health. More recent research shows that how connected you are with nature has a big impact. So that meme that went round on Instagram a little while ago of going for a stupid walk in stupid nature for my stupid mental health, it does help, but it helps more if you can connect with nature. So kind of picking blackberries rather than just going for a walk, as I mentioned earlier. Taking into account your personality type and lifestyle. So if you are a night owl and you've convinced yourself that you have to start your working day at 9 o'clock in the morning, you don't. You can start your working day at 10 or 11. If you are somebody who wants to involve a lot of movement in their day, you can go to the gym in the middle of the day. And I think kind of we have a lot of these shoulds around what work. I sat at my desk from 8 till 8 for the first 6 years of my career because that's what I'd done in advertising. That's what I thought you had to do. I now get to my desk at 10 because I go for a walk and I go to the gym in the morning. So I think kind of allowing yourself to build a business that you can fully belong to, that adapts to your personality type, your lifestyle, any kind of physical or mental health challenges you have, build your business around those. Don't squish yourself into your business. And then boundaries. We have to have boundaries to protect all of the above. And I think I have a friend called Laura Eigel who's written a book about values, which I think is downstairs. But she talks about the idea that if we can tie boundaries to our values and understand that we put boundaries in place to help us live in alignment with our values, it can help us to remember why those boundaries are in place and enforce them. So kind of understanding that every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to something else, and kind of being really intentional about how you protect your time. Cool. So Hannah says, gotta go. Cool. And she's given me her Instagram. So yeah, I will absolutely follow up with Hannah on Instagram. Cool. So I am going to stop sharing there, and apologies I've run over ever so slightly, but I did just want to do a little bit of a deeper dive than usual on that nurture section because I think it's so important that we all look after ourselves at the moment. Does anybody have any other questions? I'm just going to open my window again because I'm melting. Very hot in here. Going to take care of my basic need for a pleasant ambient temperature.
Feel free to unmute yourself to ask any questions at this stage, because at the end.
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, it's Daisy. I just wanted to say thank you. It's been really fantastic listening to you, and I feel way less alone already, actually, because so much of what you talked about I've already been doing, and you just sort of articulated so many of my inarticulate, ungrouped thoughts. I just wanted to say, for me, I have also, and I just wondered if this is something that comes up a lot, is that we also have to expect a loss or a kickback, or like for every boundary we put in place, there is somebody or something that doesn't like the boundary. For every for every act of sort of self-care and not overworking and not people pleasing and not doing, not driving ourselves, we have to expect to possibly have less visibility, less everything, and be okay with that. For me, part of my process has been that. That thing of, I think that thing of we can have it all is a myth that I've kind of had to work on getting rid of as part of my approach to becoming more sustainable in all the ways you've shared.
Yeah.
I just wondered if that has ever come up.
Yes, I think it's a yes and no. So I think you're right in that we have to understand that that may be the case. And I think we also have to question whether we actually want it all and what do we want. And I think you're absolutely right that when you put a boundary in place, people who are used to trampling all over that boundary might get upset. You might also find that people I find people who set boundaries with me, I feel safer with, because I know when they say yes, they mean yes. And so you might also find that people kind of relax around you a little bit more and trust you a little bit more because you've got these clear boundaries. And I think, you know, you mentioned the fact that every time we take care of ourselves, we have to accept that means less visibility. Again, I would say yes and no. So if I have days when I cannot show up on film. I've got various chronic health issues, and there are days when I cannot do this. But if I don't take care of myself, if I don't take days off and allow myself to not do this, there are more days when I can't do this, right? So it's sometimes you have to take a short-term hit for a long-term gain. If I am quick to recognize when I'm moving into a flare-up and say, actually, I need some time off camera today, or I need a day off work today, I recover more quickly. So in the long term, I can have more visibility. Does that make sense? And I think the more
it totally does. And I think for me, part of the process has also been acceptance around and letting go of the parts of my practice which were just about unhealthy ego or any of those kind of things, and that I have to just trust that when I work less and work in a more conscious way, it will fall into place, even though it can feel really uncomfortable.
Yeah, and that's that idea of choosing your niche and making a disproportionately positive impact. So it stops being about effort in, reward out, or effort in, impact out, and starts being about, by getting rid of that stuff that's just about ego, or getting rid of the stuff that you do just because you should, turning up at your desk at 8 o'clock in the morning because that's what you've been told you have to do. When you actually come into alignment, the things you do have a disproportionately positive impact. So that's where you start to get that. It stops being, there's an amazing book by Simon Sinek called The Infinite Game. And he talks about the idea that we use a lot of sports analogies in business, but they are different games. There's no point at which we win this game. There aren't a defined set of rules, right? Nobody blows the final whistle. And so a lot of those sports analogies don't stack up. And actually, when you're playing an infinite game, it's not a zero-sum game, right? It's not that sense, or if I do this, I can't have that, and if I don't do this, it's much more about getting things into alignment and finding that sense of flow, where then the things you do have a disproportionate impact. So it's a little bit more counterintuitive, but you're right. I think the first step is to accept some of that stuff, and then you can get into flow, where some of that stuff kind of flips on its head a little bit. I hope that helps.
Yes, definitely. No, it's been great listening. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. Couple more Instagram handles in the chat. Thank you, Jane. I want to hear more about the nettle revolution, so I'm definitely going to go and follow you. Anita says, thanks so much for your time and advice. As a self-confessed people pleaser and often burning out, I know I need to prioritize self-care. Same, Anita. And this before all the other stuff. Yeah, I mean, I teach this stuff because I need to hear it. But yeah, I think absolutely. I think the more intentional you can get about it, and the more you can see the decision. I think a lot of us do this people pleasing stuff without even realizing we're doing it. And I think a lot of this process is about kind of coming into more awareness and being more intentional about what we're saying yes to and what we're saying no to. And the wonderful thing about all of this is it's flexible. So there will be occasions when you're like, do you know what, I just need to people please today. I'm tired and I haven't got the energy for this. But as long as you're doing that consciously, and you can say, I'm not going to do that again tomorrow, it becomes, and a lot of Laura Eigel's work on boundaries is the fact that boundaries don't have to be solid. You can say, actually, right now, I need to just loosen up that boundary a little bit. But so, for example, the summer holidays are a classic example that if you have quite strict times you want to be in your studio and you want to be making, if you have caring responsibilities and all of a sudden those caring responsibilities are amplified because a parent is sick or a child is off school or whatever it is, somebody you care for has additional needs, it's okay to say, right, for this period of time, I'm going to let that boundary go. But after that period of time, I'm going to put it back. And again, it's about being intentional about this stuff and having real awareness rather than just letting things slip because you're people pleasing. And I think that's where some of the nuance, a lot of stuff on the internet is so kind of black and white, isn't it? I think that's where some of the nuance comes in, that we can be compassionate to ourselves, we can be compassionate to the people around us and still have that self-care. And I think also some self-care can be, like somebody suggested to me to take your favorite essential oil and put a couple of drops in the shower while the shower's heating up before you get in. So when you get in the shower, all the steam smells of your favorite essential oil. I mean, that is a moment of self-care that costs about £6 and takes seconds out of your day. And there are little tiny things like that that you can weave into your day that makes such a big difference. Jane says, thanks, Katie. I've found time out for me makes me more productive. Absolutely. And it's that counterintuitive thing I was just talking about with Daisy, right? You sort of think, oh God, I haven't got time to take a lunch break today. I haven't got time to go for a walk. But actually, when you do that thing, you come back and you get through your afternoon's work so much more quickly. And I find, you know, I mentioned I go for a walk and go to the gym in the morning, and that takes me 2 hours. That takes 2 hours out of my morning, but it makes the rest of my day more productive and happier. I enjoy it more when I have those endorphins in my brain. So I think a lot of this stuff, it's not a zero-sum game. It is slightly counterintuitive, and it's that idea that by taking care of yourself, you'll take care of your creative practice, which will take care of your business, which will take care of the planet. These things are all linked when we can get them lined up.
I think a lot of the time people I think people a lot of the time just feel like they need the permission to do it. So this is really lovely. I
officially give you permission. And I think also people think these things are intention, that if I look after myself, I'm neglecting my business. If I put all my effort into my business and make it as profitable as I can, I'm damaging the planet. And that can be the case. But if you can get these things lined up, the opposite can be true. So the more you look after yourself, the more your business thrives and the more the planet thrives. But it's just a question of kind of getting that alignment. Oh, how are we all feeling? Are we feeling hopeful?
I am.
Amazing. That's my most important job. I think if we're feeling hopeful, then we're good. Anita says, got to go, not because I'm too busy, but because I'm hungry. Go take care of that basic need, Anita. I love it. Awesome. Right, I am conscious I've taken up more of your time than I said I would, so let's wrap it up there. I'm going to pop my Instagram in the chat, so if anybody wants to continue the conversation, I would absolutely love that. So yeah, stay in touch. If you've got any questions about the membership, let me know. And as I said, if you join within the next week, I can offer you that 10% discount and also a complimentary one-to-one coaching and mentoring session with me, which you can take whenever you like. So we can have that as a kind of kickoff and a settling in, or you can spend a little bit of time in the membership and then use that to reflect. It's absolutely up to you. So let me just pop those in the chat again.
Fab. Thanks so much, Katie.
My absolute pleasure. Yeah, Thank you for having me.
That was incredible. Yeah, no, amazing. And yeah, I will share links around and everything as well later when I share the recording. But yeah, thanks so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real joy.